Hey, so I wanted to point out a recent article that I had published in BASSMASTER Magazine. This is the March edition, the one with Rick Clunn on the cover. And I'm really proud of an article that is in there. It's on the Texas Parks and Wildlife telemetry study. And much of this has been leaked out over the last few months. This study has been a 2-year process where two fisheries biologists for Texas Parks and Wildlife, Jake Norman and Todd Driscoll, they have followed large populations of bass in both Lake Fork and Toledo Bend, and they have studied their behavior using telemetry. So they would catch these fish, they would insert a transmitter, and then they would follow them around for 2 years using telemetry and finding the fish, and then using live scope to actually zero in on exactly how the fish is behaving and what they're doing. And their results are really interesting to me, and they're kind of counter to a lot of what we know. And again, some of this information has been leaking out, but their article just went for publication and was in fact accepted. And so they were kind enough to spend some time with me talking about this Parks and Wildlife, or their study. And so there are 3 findings that I found really interesting coming from their effort, and I wanted to share those with you in summary. Number 1, flats versus drop-offs. 40% of the time, roughly 40% of the time, in both Toledo Bend and Lake Fork, these bass were located on flats, nondescript, no man's land, just out in the middle of nowhere. And that kind of matches up with what we've learned with a live scope recently. And the last few years, a lot of big fish have been coming from live scope on these big nondescript flats. But I thought 40% was a high number. And that's the same sentiment echoed by Todd Driscoll with Parks and Wildlife, Texas Parks and Wildlife. He thought that was a higher than expected number as well. Most of the time we jockey for position on points and drop-offs and creek channels and so forth. And it's not that those fish aren't located on those structures, but the fact of the matter is 40% of the time they're on these nondescript flats. I thought that was super interesting, a little bit counter to what we might expect. The other thing that I find really interesting is that they have very small home ranges. And you would think on massive reservoirs like Toledo Bend and even Lake Fork that these fish would just move all over the lake. The fact of the matter is that they have about 120-acre radius in which they live. And in fact, a lot of times it was much smaller than that. And what's interesting to me is that they both commented that there's been a lot of telemetry studies done in the past, and most of the time these studies have been done on very small reservoirs, not even reservoirs, they're just small, almost like farm ponds. And the same type of home range was found on these little bitty small lakes as well as the great big massive impoundments. So in other words, they don't have these big migrations. And that kind of leads to my third point that I thought was really interesting, and it's that they disavowed the whole notion of bass migrating. In fact, specifically talking about fall migrations, which is, we've all been told that fish move to the banks of creeks in the fall. They said 0% of the fish, not a single one of the fish that they were studying moved into these creeks in the fall of the year. And now we know that fish can be caught in the backs of these creeks, but what Todd Driscoll summarizes or theorizes is that these are resident fish that just live there throughout the year, and they become activated when these big schools or big pods of shad start to move back there. Because it is true that shad move into these areas, but the bass that they studied, around 40 in each reservoir, none of them moved into the creeks in pursuit of them. So as long as they have forage opportunities where they live, they're not going to change. And now, I want to speak to the fact that just because they don't have big migration patterns or they weren't observed in the study, that doesn't mean that they don't reposition. Certainly they would move, shallow in the spring. They would move on to little drops in the winter and the summer months. They would have some movement within these 120-acre home ranges, but they did not see big, massive migrations. And one outlier that I thought was just super interesting and just kind of speaks to the random nature of fish behavior is they said, most of the fish were on this very small, confined 120-acre or less home range, but there was one that just went 7 miles in 11 days for no reason. So they caught the fish, in one location. 11 days later, he was 7 miles away. No explanation as to why. There was plenty of food for that fish there. I think what this study summarizes is that it disavows a lot of the assumptions that we've made about fish and fish behavior. And we're just now getting to really more scientific analysis, and the use of live scope in combination with studies like these, I think, are opening our eyes to a whole different world. And I'm really curious what your application to this information does for you. Does it change the way you fish? Does it change your approach? I mean, live scope is dominating all the major tournaments right now. And I think these are the fish that these live scopers are finding, these fish that are off the beaten path. And so it's opened up my eyes to a whole different population of fish and their behavior. I'm curious what it does for you, if anything. I thought it was a really interesting study, and they have a second study coming out that I'm going to follow up with them on, and it talks about the movement of fish in the presence of driving over them with sonar and how that pushes those fish off of their spots. And so that'll be pending in a few months. Appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the article, and curious about your thoughts.